Hi guys, in today's I'm going to talk about what's interesting about Amazon interviews. I prepared here two sheets of paper with, I believe, what are the most important questions in Amazon interviews, and I'm going to give you next little bits of advice on both older concepts, but also some newer ones, which you may probably not be aware of as of recently. So without further ado, let's just get straight into these around 20, in fact, less than 20 questions. The first and the most commonly asked question, or the most commonly asked type of question in any Amazon interview and pretty much in any company, is your elevator pitch. You tell me about yourself, your why Amazon, or why you, or where do you see yourself in 5 years. These are all correlated, and I believe the best way to prep them is to prep them together, to brainstorm them at the same time. Now, what's new about these things is that recently I discovered that actually one of the main strengths of ChatGPT is that it gives you great ideas for your elevator pitch, including for your role, including for your expertise, for your subject level expertise, your level of expertise, I should say. But recently I've seen many successes using ChatGPT exactly for your elevator pitch. Okay, now speaking about your why Amazon, or where do you see yourself in 5 years, which by the way is music to HR's ears. There are various templates that you may employ for your answer to these questions, such as, to first say that, hey, I want to join Amazon because my level of expertise is very much relevant, and you would go with your strengths. And second of all, because I connect very well with Amazon's culture and leadership principles, for instance. You should know that templates do help here, and frameworks, various frameworks do help to the extent that it helps you to sell best during the job interview. And ideally, what you want to do with your elevator pitch is to make a starting point for the conversation in the direction that you want. Okay, so ideally, if you have that one highlight from your CV that you want to talk about with the hiring manager, you would want to talk about that highlight for a bit longer during your elevator pitch. Okay, it doesn't always work, but this is the idea. If you want to, if you are that good to try to drive the conversation that way during a job interview. Of course, this is for more senior roles. Also, another more peculiar approach, if you want, would be that with respect to the question, why do you want to join Amazon, would be that, hey, you know what, I'm not really sure I want to join Amazon just yet. I just want to, for now, I just want to learn more how my future team could help me develop, and how it could also help you reach your goals, which is the main purpose of this interview. So needless to say, if your CV would justify such an answer, you should also consider this approach. Okay. Furthermore, last but not least, technical roles will have to pay particular attention to this, because it's almost always that the conversation will evolve from this question. So if you focus on what you want them to hear during your elevator pitch, chances are also you increase the probability that you will be talking about the projects that you want to talk about during that interviewing session. Okay. Next, and by the way, this next we're going to go through the more important behavioral questions in these interviews. Describe a difficult interaction you had with the customer. How did you deal with it? What was the outcome? And how would you handle it differently if you were to handle it again? So why would someone ask you such a question in a job interview? Well, they would ask you such a question because they want to screen you on the leadership principle, customer obsession. Okay, unsurprisingly here, because it's pretty obvious question. Now, from experience, to answer this question, You're not, of course, expected to talk about the time when you corner the customer into a deal or any such dubious or ambiguous behavior. However, from experience, it's not entirely impossible for someone to shoot themselves in the leg using these questions. And furthermore, it's widely assumed that it's nearly impossible to train someone for customer obsession. Some people are like that, some people aren't. And this is why this question, this type of question about customer obsession, about dealing with customers, is so important in a job interview. So this is the most commonly asked question that you should always prepare, regardless if your customers are internal or external. Okay, again, your experiences may vary with this regard. The third question I want to talk about here: tell me about the time when you strongly disagreed with your manager or peer on something you considered as very important to the business. Why was it? What was it? And how did you handle it? Knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently? Okay, so why would someone ask you such a question of a time when you strongly disagreed with your manager? Well, they would ask you this because they want to screen you on the leadership principle of have backbone. Okay, they even have a backbone test at Amazon in job interviews, including, or I should say, specifically for SDs as well. Okay, so what would be an example of a time when you disagreed with the manager? For example, you could disagree with them over a new initiative. You wanted to have our new fence painted in blue, but I wanted it in red, as it would catch more attention and create more buzz for the business. I gathered some data pointing to studies which proved that this color red would be more appealing. He agreed, and we did it. We painted the fence in red. Now, if your interviewer would follow up with something on the lines of, in retrospect, was it really so that important to have that fence painted in red? I mean, I don't like red as a color. And maybe what if you only had blue paint? Would you change it? And your answer would be something on the lines of, yeah, well, you're probably right. I mean, in this scenario, I'm not sure those studies were enough to justify the extra costs for the red paint. Okay, so in other words, if you change your mind this easily in a job interview, and if you change your mind based on what the interviewer likes, that is, they don't like red as a color, then you would miserably fail this backbone test, and you would get disqualified. It's as straightforward as that. Okay. Number 4, we have a couple of these questions, so I won't insist on each and every one of them. Give me an example of a calculated risk that you had taken where speed was critical. What was the situation and how did you handle it? What steps did you take to mitigate the risk? What was the outcome? And knowing what you know now, would you have done something differently? Okay. Why would someone ask you such a question? Have you spotted the principle yet? It's bias for action. Okay, so they want to screen you on bias for action here. And here I'd like to introduce a very important template, one of the very few templates that are worth considering to take seriously for a job interview, which is the STAR method. That is to answer behavioral questions using the STAR method: situation, task, then the action, and then the results. Okay. So if I wanted to give you a quick example of a time when I took a calculated risk when speed was critical in a fast-paced project, is when I fixed an urgent bug preventing customers using the website. Risk was it could get worse and crash the whole website, and if it weren't had it not been tested properly. So I used the principle in God we trust, everything else we test, and with a bit of help from colleagues, I managed to fix it in 3 days, and my manager commended me for the achievement. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward example, but I want you to also to notice the STAR method that it's employed here. The reason the STAR method is so important because the interviewers expect you to answer questions using the STAR method. Now, if you feel like if you're applying for an executive role, you might feel that this is a template and it might not play to your strength, to your communication. if communication is a strength. But believe me, if you do at least the first version of your answers in star format, you will be able to evolve them beyond that star format. And even if you don't keep each element, you could mix the situation and task, no problem. But the star method is something that works, and I found this throughout the years, that there's really no better way to answer questions other than the star method, or the situation. Instead of the task, you could call it objective, or various other small changes, but the star method is something I highly recommend you. Number 5, tell me about the time when you didn't have enough data to make the right decision. What did you do? What path did you take? Did the decision turn out to be the correct one? Okay, so a time when you didn't have enough data to make the right decision. Why would someone ask you such a question? Okay, because they want to see your decision-making skills. But more importantly, the leadership principle we're talking about here are right a lot. Okay, now this principle is one of the more counterintuitive ones to understand, but it literally means what it says. Great leaders are right a lot. So if you're right a lot, then you tend to be perceived as a great leader, including as a candidate, including in a job interview. Okay. Now, simplest example: if you spot the leadership principle from the question 5 times in a row, without knowing the questions in advance, this qualifies that you're right a lot, for instance. Okay, we've already been through 4 of these principles. So if you spotted 4, you only have 1 to be right a lot, 1 more to go to be right a lot. Okay. It's it can be challenging during these times, and especially nowadays, what I see with the people I talk to is that there is a tendency to prepare less and less for these job interviews, according to my statistics. And honestly, I wouldn't have expected this, but this is not the purpose of this video. But what I wanted to let you know here is that what I noticed, especially this year, was that the quality, the expectations in job interviews have only increased from the candidates, whereas the quality of the candidate, the quality of the preparation of the candidates put into the interview has only decreased. So my recommendation for you would be to really clearly self-assess, and not necessarily against other candidates, but against against what what it takes to prepare such an interview. Because I found that it's ever more challenging to take these interviews seriously. And since companies hire less for high-paying jobs these days, Amazon included, they will be able to allocate their best interviewers for these interviews. And with a great interviewer, interviews are never easy. You remember the backbone test, and there are various other tests that they might use, including the bar raisers. There could be more bar raisers if you want, but my point is that even if you find that some principles, such as this one, are right a lot, are complex to understand, you should really take the time and brainstorm for the best possible stories that you have to sell yourself during the interview, because you will almost inevitably get one of these questions. Okay. Number 6, give me an example of a time when you were able to deliver an important project under a tight deadline. What sacrifices did you have to make to meet the deadline, and how did they impact the final deliverable? What was the final outcome? Okay. Why would someone ask you such a question? Because they want to screen you on the principle of deliver results. Okay. With respect to the question, a time when you are able to deliver an important project under a tight deadline, a mistake I hear a lot from candidates is they want to try to justify tension for delivering for the project with all sorts of excuses. Lack of planning, lack of attention to detail, lack of you name it. But the key takeaway, the key idea that you want to transmit from an answer to this question is to deliver delivery, results here. Okay, so focus on the results. Also, with respect to the last part of the question, what was the final outcome? When, unless they ask you for a failure, it should be a success. Okay, needless to say, even if in real life scenarios there might be slight adjustments to that success, there might be some imperfections if you want. Speaking of imperfections, the next one: describe a time when you refused to compromise your standards. What was the result? Okay, so why would someone ask you such a question? Which principle are they interested in? It's insist on the highest standards. Okay, it's pretty much it's a counterintuitive question. However, one of the interesting ones to test on whether someone has high standards. And if you remember, I talked in the beginning of this video about customer obsession. It's assumed this cannot be easily taught or trained. It's a bit of the same thing here. So what does high standards mean for you? What does high standards mean for your role? And of course, it's extremely subjective. I cannot really exemplify here with an example that fits all purposes of fits any role in particular, because how you define high quality, it's something very much up to you. Okay. What I can tell you from experience is that I've never heard of an example that's of too high quality. Okay, for someone having standards that are too high. Okay. Number 8, tell me about a time when you were trying to understand a complex problem on your team and you had to dig into the details to figure it out. Who did you talk with, or where did you have to look to find the most valuable information? How did you use the information to help to solve the problem? Okay, it's dive deep, in case you're wondering which principle they're interested to screen you on here. So this concept, this principle of diving deep is, I believe, pretty self-explanatory. What you may not be aware of is that this approach, this interviewing technique of diving deep into a concept is pretty widely used in major companies. Even Elon Musk was bragging about how he used this one interview question to find out on whether someone is for real. Because the idea is that if you talk about a project that you've done, a complex project that you've done, and you're not able to dive really deep into details, into metrics, and to remember details, then people will become very skeptical that you, not necessarily you did the project, but that you owned that project. Okay, and this, remembering all the details might not be essential for a phone screening round. Okay, but during a loop, that is critically important that you remember all these details. And unfortunately, the only cure I know to remember all these details would be to actually brainstorm for that story, to even focus on making a brain dump of several pages to try to really remember all those details. Even if you don't remember all the details, you can estimate, but you could prepare for deep dives in advance, because together with Have Backbone, they are an interviewing technique which is hugely efficient. Okay, and dive deep, I believe it's fair to say it's more commonly used than the Backbone test. Okay, now of course, there's also a small number of candidates who maybe focus too much on diving deeper into details with these answers and tend to fall into analysis paralysis. So this would be the other extreme, but really it's a non-issue here. Okay, so this was dive deep. Number 9, tell me about the time when you helped one of your team members to develop their career. How did you help that team member? What was the result? Okay, so which leadership principle is this one? I believe it's pretty easy to spot that it's hire and develop the best here. Okay, so this one is, from experience, pretty straightforward to answer for individual contributor roles. I mean, don't tell me you never coached a team member. This applies to junior roles even, I believe. But where it gets more interesting is for manager level roles. There are also questions specifically designed for manager level roles in Amazon interviews, such as tell me about the time when you had a low performing individual on your team. How did you deliver feedback and did their performance improve? Okay, this will be a question specifically for a manager level role, where this principle is also significantly more important. okay, because that's your subject matter expertise to a certain extent. Number 10, give me an example of a complex problem that you solved with a simple solution. What was the what made the problem complex, and how do you know that your solution addressed the problem? Okay. So why would someone ask you such a question in a job interview with Amazon? They would ask you this because they want to screen you on the leadership principle of invent and simplify. Okay, so maybe not so obvious from the question, but this is invent and simplify. It's a pretty standard question. And actually, it's this type of question I'd struggle with if I hear it for the first time. Because I wouldn't have something on the spot. I really have to brainstorm hard on this one. So I definitely recommend you prepare in advance. But if I were to give an example, in sales, if sales are slow because demand is low, one approach to fix this is to shift focus from advertising to referrals. Okay, so especially when you have a great product. Okay, so if you know your customers are super happy, you know they will recommend your product, and you could focus on that sales funnel instead of just advertising on Google or something. You know, when, especially in this context, and of course you would explain. You know, of course the situation is quite complex because you have various strategies. You try to advertise through various sources, but it didn't work, and it turned out to be that the referrals are something that give increasingly good results. Okay, or as a technical PM, one of the complex situations is if your website traffic is booming and you need to scale. Okay, so caching mechanisms or even newer approaches if you want. But the idea here is basically to think what's complex for your role, and over time when you found a pretty simple solution, which of course works, if I may suggest. Okay. Number 11, tell me about the time when you had to communicate change in a direction that you anticipated people would have concerns with. What did you do to understand the concerns and mitigate them? Were there any changes you made along the way after hearing these concerns? How did you handle questions and the resistance? Were you able to get people comfortable with the change? So this is an important one, particularly for senior roles, but do you know which leadership principle they're screening you on here? So it's earn trust. Okay, so as I said, it's pretty important. If I were to give a quick example, you lead a team of 5 people working full-time on a feature for the past 6 months, and you're 2 months away from completing a major feature. And then your business partner is telling you, then I have this new feature which will bring in much needed revenue, and customers I spoke to would love to use it. How do I convince my development team ditch current work they've been working on for the past 6 months for a commercial feature which they might not even enjoy developing? Okay, so the key here, as the principle states, is to earn their trust. And I'd have a couple of avenues here. I link the new features with the business outcome, so it's clear for everyone that this is important, this is essential for the business that we're into. Especially in startups, people would easily connect to these things. But also at Amazon, you apply for Amazon role because you self-identify with their culture and their principles in general. Okay, the second avenue to earn their trust would be to reassure them that their work will not get lost, and I'll give them 1 week to package the code so it can be reworked later on. You know, because if you work 6 months or something and then you just simply ditch it, it's highly unlikely it's going to be of much use later on. So there must be some caution there to prepare that code to be usable later, so you care about their work. Number 3, another action could have to be one-on-ones with each member to better listen to what they say, because when you listen to people, you also are considerably more likely to earn their trust. And finally, the 4th idea here would be to incentivize them somehow, to offer a bonus of some kind or even a promotion for exceptional delivery. Okay, so if you motivate your team, you could also earn their trust. Okay, so this would be the idea. It's hugely important, especially for senior roles. Tell me about the time when you took on something significant outside your area of responsibility, and why was it important, and what was the outcome? Okay, Um, this is the principle of ownership. In case you're wondering, it's presented as the second Amazon leadership principles. It's hugely important, but in my review, in my tracking of how often these questions get asked, it's not as commonly asked. It's not the second most commonly asked question about leadership principles these days. Also, I believe that so long as you know why the question is asked, ownership, I believe it's pretty straightforward to give them what they want to hear for this question. Next one, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Okay, so this is again pretty standard, commonly asked interview question. If you're speaking about commonly asked interview question, commonly answers for strength would be, of course, public speaking with Toastmasters. You won't get disqualified, but you won't score any points for sure. And worst weakness I've ever heard is to someone say that they don't have interviewing skills. So this will be the two representative examples. I really won't insist on these ones because there are so many other videos I made about these, and I believe there are some great resources for you to consider if you want to dive deeper into these. Next one, a time when it demonstrated, and you can insert the leadership principle here. Okay, so time when you exhibited ownership, for instance, or customer obsession, we name the principle you want. So this is a commonly asked question. And it is, I believe, a good enough reasons for you to prepare stories for each of the leadership principles. Okay, and just a side note here, if you ask ChatGPT how many leadership principles does Amazon have, it will tell you that they have 14, when in fact they have 16 now. But in reality, I'd rather side with ChatGPT to prepare for my interview because those two, the two newer leadership principles are not really all that used in job interviews. I don't believe the purpose of those principles is for job interviews, okay? But really, long story short, timely demonstrated insert leadership principle should trigger you to prepare a proper story bank for each of these principles. Next, tell me about the time when you were working on an initiative or goal and saw an opportunity to do something much bigger or better than the initial focus was. Did you take that opportunity? Why or why not? What was the outcome? Okay, so this is probably also one of the least intuitive ones to spot the principle, but this is about think big as a leadership principle. And if I were to give a quick example here of a time when I spotted a bigger initiative, was a feature in one of my training programs. I used ChatGPT to allow people to generate sample answers to behavioral questions for your own role. And then I realized I could actually extend that to demo full story bank using ChatGPT for a given role. Okay, so this seems to be quite useful since it looks like everyone's using that feature. Okay, there's also various other reasons why everyone's using that feature, because that actually gives you examples that you want to hear. You know, not because ChatGPT is that great at answering behavioral questions. It's not, but it gives you a reference point, and it's easier to consume information rather than to produce stories. Okay, so this could be also another explication why that feature works so well. Next, give me an example of a time when you helped save costs or eliminate waste within your role or organization. What was the situation? What was the impact? Okay. Why would someone ask you this question? Because they want to screen you on the leadership principle of frugality. Okay. This is not usually a principle they would screen you on for junior roles, at least in my experience. Examples of manager level roles would be, when you eliminated 10% of a department, but usually L7 roles will get asked about this quite often, and especially during this time. So I believe it's also an important one, again, to prepare for more senior types of roles. And last but not least, tell me about the time when you realized you needed a deeper level of subject matter expertise to do your job well. What did you do about it? What was the outcome? And is there anything you would have done differently? Okay. This is the leadership principle of learn and be curious. Okay. It's one that goes hand in hand with invent and simplify. Usually your stories could be interchanged between these principles. So what would be some examples here? For sales, you need to get a deeper level of expertise of something technical, okay? Or for technical roles, maybe you need to gain some understanding over some accounting concepts such as transfer pricing operations, okay? One thing you would want to focus on here on Learn and Be Curious is that you focus on learning from multiple sources. Okay, so if you only learn from one source and you insist that one source, that guy on YouTube is the only resource I need for my Amazon interview, then I believe it's not the best way to showcase your learning skills. Okay. Now, in conclusion, this would be the most important questions you'd want to prepare for an Amazon interview, and I believe it's pretty self-explanatory. Reason for this being that it covers all the classic leadership principles, if you want, and if you want a bit of further advice, the best candidates, or if you want to on advice on where you want to be for this Amazon interview, I know that the best candidates have developed, they're so good at answering these questions that they're able to educate their interviewers about their experience during a job interview. Also, in case you're wondering what's the best approach to prepare for an Amazon interview, it's very important to understand that this is not about just answering questions, even questions related to leadership principles, but this is primarily about preparing a story bank. And the way you prepare a story bank would be to first brainstorm for stories for those principles, and only then tuning up your stories using various sample questions. A reason for that approach of answering questions over and over again to not be efficient, simplest example with the deep dive. Okay, so if you just focus on answering questions over and over again, you will almost certainly not go deep enough into concepts to explain them, to remember all the metrics, all the key elements of that story for an intense interview. Okay, so in an intense interview, they must deep proof what you know about what you've done, and if you were actually the one owning this project, because it's not always the case. I mean, people are trying to bias the interviewers towards them to make them believe that they were responsible for far more important initiatives during their previous work. This is the most common way people try to influence those interviews, and in my experience, quite unsuccessfully. But the point is that if you want to prepare for real for an Amazon interview, you must have a proper story bank. And in my statistics, it's only less than 5% of people who report themselves as being happy with their story bank going into an intense job interview, not only at Amazon, but at pretty much any company. But if only less than 5 people self-report that they're happy with the story bank, you can imagine that you could also take this as an opportunity for you to really differentiate yourself from other candidates during the job interview, this being by far the best technique to pass them. So hopefully you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.